It was a long, long time ago. How long, you may ask? Well, it was before this was called the Americas. This was when man and woman and child were first entering this area. And in what is now called California, there was the Great Tornado. The Great Tornado came down with such a force that it cracked the very ground, forming what we now know of as the San Andreas Fault. And then the Great Tornado started heading west. And when it came to a large group of trees, those trees saw that tornado coming and they were so scared, they were petrified. And we now know of them as the petrified forest. And then it continued west and it came to a large area, rocky area, and it started just carving that area out, forming what we call the Grand Canyon. And all of that rock was circling around and around and around in that tornado, and it held it for quite a while until it started heading north. And as it was traveling north, it deposited all of that rock into what we now call the Rocky Mountains. And when it was heading up north, it got stuck for just a little bit and it drilled straight down into the ground, forming what we call Old Faithful. And then it decided to head east again, and it traveled quite a ways before it got to some very slippery ground, and it skipped 5 times, forming the Great Lakes. And then it made its mistake. It started heading south. And as it was heading south, it was forming both the Mississippi River and throwing all that material into what is now known as the Appalachian Mountains. And it got down clear south to where the Gulf of Mexico is. But the Gulf of Mexico wasn't there yet. It was a large area of quicksand. And that tornado traveled right to the middle of that quicksand, and it started sinking deeper and deeper into the quicksand until it reached the Atlantic Ocean. And the Atlantic Ocean started pouring its waters into the Great Tornado. And it ended up drowning the Great Tornado. But do you know what? Inside of that quicksand, there was magnetic material in a triangular shape. And we now know of that as the Bermuda Triangle. And all of that magnetic material sucks down ships and planes and anything metallic that might be in that area. But that tornado, it's still with us. Or maybe the ghost of that tornado in a weather phenomenon known as El Nino that still shows up every once in a while on the West Coast. My next story I'm going to tell you is one of the first story that I ever won a tall tale contest with that some of you may have heard, called Fishing with Spider Webs. It all started off on an ordinary day until I woke up. You see, when I woke up, I heard this little tiny voice. And I looked all around, but there was nobody there. But then I saw on the floor, there was this little tiny spider. And I knelt down and I listened. And this is what I heard. Hello, I'm Miranda. I'm a spider. Please don't step on me. And I didn't step on that spider. I took good care of it. And one day, I decided exactly what I was going to do with this spider. I was going to use it for fishing. And no, I'm not talking about using it for bait. I was going to use it to create massive underwater spider webs to catch fish, because it's illegal to use nets, but nowhere in the law does it say you can't use spider webs. Now, at first, I did have a bit of a problem. You see, spider webs, they aren't strong enough to catch fish, and they also are not waterproof. Now, this did perplex me a bit, but I devised a special diet for Miranda. I ground up concrete and water sealer, and I mixed that all up and I fed that to Miranda. Well, you know what? Within 3 months, Miranda's webs were as strong as concrete, as waterproof as water sealer, and still as flexible as spider webs. Now, one day I took Miranda down to the lake. I had herself tie her web to my line and I cast her out. Splash. I waited for half an hour and Miranda came crawling up the line. And I waited another half an hour and my line broke. I hadn't planned on the amount of fish that Miranda could catch. Well, I knew this was still a great idea. And the next time I took Miranda fishing, I was a lot smarter. I just drove my truck down to the edge of the lake and tied her to the hitch of the truck, and I threw her out. Splash. And I waited an hour, and she came crawling up her web. I got in my truck, and you know what? My truck was barely able to haul those 3,000 pounds of fish out of the lake. And guess what? That's when the local wildlife and parks officer was coming in my direction. And he was not in a good mood, not at all. He said, "You realize that you cannot use nets in this lake, don't you?" I said, "I wasn't using nets at all. I was using spider webs," and I introduced him to Miranda. Well, I'm not sure if he bought that hook, line, and spider or not, but he did let me go. But he told me to never, ever use spider webs in the lake again. And I did not. But I knew I had a great idea. I asked Miranda if she could train other spiders to catch fish. And she said, "Sure." And so I had her train lots of spiders because I was going to go into the business of selling fishing spiders. But you know what? People in my area, they were not going to buy my fishing spiders. Now, this was a good 30 years ago, and there was not a great ways for selling spiders. And so I devised a system of hooking computers up together, and I named it the Internet, which you all know. Yeah, it became known as the World Wide Web. And now you know why. Well, I got the system going and I was selling lots and lots of spiders. But then one day I had another problem. I could not find Miranda anywhere. It turned out when Miranda was napping one day, I had accidentally sold her. And so the next week I got on the phone and I called everybody up who I had sold spiders to. And I finally got a hold of the right person, but it was also the wrong person. You see, it was someone for the equal rights of insects and arachnids. And they were looking for me because I was feeding them this diet that they didn't think the spider should be eating. And you know what? It was 2 weeks later. The police arrived at my door and they read me Miranda's rights. Yep. And they hauled me away. Well, in court, Miranda explained that the new diet just caused a little gas and they let me go. But if you ever see a talking spider, I recommend that you just let the spider lie. Or, as Miranda would say, what a tangled web we weave when telling stories that are oh so hard to believe. And now I'll tell you my true story, the true story of concussions that I've had throughout my life. My concussions, well, they started at an early age. I think I was in about third grade when I was just walking in onto the playground during recess and somebody plowed right into me and I fell down. I don't remember falling down. All I remember was coming to with a headache and everybody standing around me. Well, they took me back to class and I was having a little bit of trouble. I mean, I couldn't even read the word the. And so they ended up calling my mother and she asked me all kinds of questions on the ride to the doctor. And I was told later that I was giving her really weird answers to her questions. Well, they diagnosed me with my first concussion. And that wasn't my last concussion. I've had about 4 more since then. But the one that I'm going to tell you about now is the one that was really quite the weirdest. You see, one day I was texting and walking. I know, don't do that, but that's what I was doing. I was texting and walking by the local elevator and I walked right into a piece of farm equipment, cutting my eyebrow about right there. And I didn't fall down. I was able to stay up, but I was a bit dazed and I was bleeding from my eyebrow on something that wasn't even sharp. And I went home and things started getting a little strange. The first thing I remember happening was I couldn't find where I had put things. You see, my memory, it was gone after about 20 or 30 seconds. I couldn't remember what I had done or anything the 20 or 30 seconds before that. And I thought that people were actually moving things on me when really I just couldn't remember where I had put them. And the next thing, I developed super hearing. Have you ever heard of super hearing? Well, one night I was trying to sleep and I couldn't sleep. It sounded like people were talking right out my window. And so I got up and I looked outside. There was nobody outside my window. They were clear catty corner on the corner of the block talking softly, but yet it sounded like they were talking right outside of my window to me. But even that isn't the strangest thing that happened. You see, I started studying everything that was going on around me, and I discovered that there was some kind of secret code going on. And I started writing notes down, and I started just trying to decipher everything that was going on around me. And I convinced myself that all of this code was telling me that my house was going to start on fire. And you know what I did next? I started taking everything out of my house and putting it in my backyard. And as I was doing that, the neighbor came and talked to me. And I explained to him how I just thought my house was going to start on fire. But the next thing I know, he's called my landlord and the police officer to come and talk to me. And I explained to him that I just thought my house was going to start on fire. And so I was emptying my house. And so that night, I told the officer that I would go sleep at a friend's house. My friend, he wasn't home that night, and he still doesn't know that I slept in his house. But my house didn't start on fire that night. And it's still right here, right now. But then I kept deciphering and I decided It wasn't my house. It was somebody else's, somebody that I knew. And so I went to the police officer's house and I told him, I think their house, that this person's house is going to burn down. And he said, well, his dad just happened to be my landlord. And he said, my dad had told me you were acting a little strange. I think you just need a vacation. And maybe I did, but I didn't take a vacation because I didn't know that I was suffering from a concussion. But anyhow, that person's house did not start on fire. However, the husband of that house one day was driving down the highway and his car spontaneously combusted and burned down to the frame within 10 minutes. So, did my concussion actually cause me to be able to predict a fire? We'll never know if it actually did or if it's a mere coincidence. Thank you.